When the Buffalo Bills lost last season in the playoffs, it felt like one of the big reasons was the pass rush. So they went out and they signed Von Miller. He gets hurt. He can't play in their most important game of the season. The Bengals go out. They lose the Super Bowl in part because the offensive line wasn't good enough. So they go out and they spend a lot on veterans who can just give them reliable snaps. Then those guys get hurt. They can't play in the most important game of the season. Now, someone had to win, but the Bengals' offensive line played great. Meanwhile, in the most important game of this season and last season, and maybe the season before that, and maybe the season before that, the Packers' offensive line, which had been really good all season, which had been planned for by Brian Gutekunst, they go out in the most important game and they can't get it done. So what is the difference? And just how good was the plan this season? We're going to talk about that, plus the latest on the reports around the quarterbacks in Green Bay. All of that on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. And when you use the promo code Locked On, you can get a 100% deposit bonus up to $100. Again, that's the promo code Locked On with PrizePicks. The reason I want to start with this process question is because something stood out to me in the lead up to the Bills-Bengals game on Sunday. I came across the statistic that if the Bengals won, it was going to be their 5th win in the last 2 seasons in the postseason. And the reason that stood out to me was because in the last 8 years, so you go back to 2014, since the Packers collapsed it was the year 2015, the Packers have 5 playoff wins. Now, there are going to be fans that say you have to count the first round byes. Those are wins. The Bengals have been playing in the wild card round each of the last 2 years. Yes, but this is now 2 conference championship games for the Bengals, and they've won one of them. The Packers have not won a conference championship game since 2010, the only conference championship game that they have won. And the reason that was interesting to me going in was the Bengals are built a little differently than the Packers. They have a defensive coordinator who scares people. They have skill talent that is deep and also scares people. And they have a quarterback who is an absolute expert processor. I texted a league source before this game. They said, by the way, the Bengals were going to win by 2 scores. They won by 3. And I said, this offense is probably the exact offense that the Packers would run if Rodgers got his way. All shotgun. It's deep shots all the time. And what this league source told me was the difference is Joe Burrow always makes the right read. He always runs the concept. And because he can manipulate defenses and because he's so accurate, he can just be right. And because you can just throw 50-50 balls to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I was going to say Chase Higgins. That's not a person. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. But it doesn't account for this offensive line question. How can the Bengals play so well in this big game against, admittedly, not the best Bills front, but like Greg Rousseau is a good player. Like this Bills defense was great all season, 4th in DVOA, 7th in EPA per play. Even without Von Miller, this was a really good defense most of the year. Against a bad defense, the Packers managed 16 points. Why is that? Why is that? And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for why the offensive line has played poorly over the last few years. They did not play well in either 49er game. Part of that is in the second 49er game, you're playing with a bunch of backups. And at least in this case, the right tackle, I thought they should have played Yosh Nijman and kept Billy Turner at right tackle. I've said this a million times. I don't need to repeat it again. The same situation in 2020. In that 2021 NFC Championship game, I thought they made a mistake not playing Elgton Jenkins at left tackle and keeping Billy Turner at right tackle. Instead, they moved Turner to left tackle and Rick Wagner at right tackle. But still, Elgton Jenkins didn't have a good game. Corey Linsley didn't have a good game. You go back last year, the Packers' best players did not play their best football. Aaron Jones has not come through in these big moments. Aaron Rodgers. 10 points and 16 points in season-ending gotta-have-it games. It's just not good enough. And so I can't blame the coaches for the offensive line poor play. Now, I can blame them for the decisions, but I can't blame them when Zadarius Smith says, I wasn't ready to play mentally. I was not in the right mindset. Ultimately, it's up to the player to be in that place. Part of it is coaching, but I would say most of it is on the player. Now, in the game, the game plans and the play calls, 100%, those are the coaches. Now, you still have to go out and execute. But so, the Bills example, I think, is also a good reason for us to take a step back and go, okay, well, sometimes you do everything right and it still doesn't work. So the Packers, great example. This is the flip side of this argument because they bring David Bakhtiari along slow, they give him rest, and he's ready. He plays. And you bring Elgton Jenkins along slow, he's ready. He plays. You bring Zach Tom along slow, he's ready. Yosh Nijman has some issues. You can throw Zach Tom in there. He played decent football. But overall, your offensive line wasn't good enough. Didn't open up enough holes in the run game. Did not protect Aaron Rodgers well enough. So you had a plan. You drafted Zach Tom. You drafted Sean Ryan. You have Yosh Nijman, who you've been developing over the last few seasons. You drafted Josh Myers. You drafted John Runyon Jr. and Elgton Jenkins. And again, you had the management of these injuries. You had Zach Tom ready to go at left tackle or right tackle. This was good. And all season, it was good. The blocking after about week 5, week 6, when they actually had their guys together, this was one of the best pass protecting offensive lines in the league. Not quite as good in the run game, but still, this was a top 5 in the aggregate offensive line all season. They play their worst football at the worst time. It was a good plan. The offensive line, they had a good plan for the offensive line. It worked most of the season, and then in the game where they needed it to work, it didn't. I don't have a good excuse for that. I don't have a good explanation for that. Sometimes weird things just happen. Now, I think if you look at something like the run defense, part of that is they played a lot of too high. They want to live in that world. Matt LaFleur wants to live in that world. Okay, you go out and you get a disruptor, Devontae Wyatt. You think he's going to be ready from the rip. He's not. Quay Walker, you think he's going to be ready off the rip. He's not. But eventually, by the end of the season, he was. And this defense actually played well enough to win in that Lions game. You hold them to 20 points. Their season road average. You hold any team to 20 points when Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback, you expect to win those football games. So by the end of the season, Jair Alexander, he's, second team All-Pro. You get contributions from Kingsley Enagbare. You made investments in the defensive front. You made investments in the secondary, all the first-round picks. And so you go, okay, this was for the most part good process. Now, Joe Barry, not great, but I understand wanting to have him back for year 2 at this point. This is a top 10 passing defense. Maybe you think you get a little more from Quay Walker, a little more from Devontae Wyatt, and you can do a lot of this same stuff. Joe Barry should get a lot of credit for his evolution, especially at the end of the season. Where the Packers really miscalculated the most was a quarterback. They expected Aaron Rodgers to be an MVP caliber player and elevate his receivers. Sammy Watkins was a, Devin Funchess sort of lottery ticket. They hit on Christian Watson. They hit on Romeo Doubs for a day 3 rookie. Romeo Doubs gave them everything they needed and more. Allen Lazard gave them what they expected from Allen Lazard. Randall Cobb was on third down a really useful player. Aaron Jones had maybe his best season as a pro. A.J. Dillon, especially in the second half, played well. This was a top 10 offense. But it just wasn't good enough in those pivotal moments. So where did the process go wrong? Well, I don't think it was a mistake, by the way, to bet on Aaron Rodgers. I get killed for being a Rodgers skeptic. And I'm not even a Rodgers skeptic. I'm a Rodgers critic because I think Aaron Rodgers is a great, all-time great player. I have criticized some of the attitude stuff, some of the leadership stuff, some of the stuff he does off the field. I have made some jokes at his expense about some of the stuff off the field for sure. But on the field, no one was banging the drum louder in 2020 and 2021 for him to win the MVP. And I was one of the few people, by the way, in 2020 who said Aaron Rodgers is coming back. That 2021 spring offseason, I said Rodgers is going to be back. To anyone who would listen, every day on the show, practically, I was saying he's back. I'm telling you, he's back. He's coming back. And guess what? He came back. And then last year, I'm telling you, Aaron Rodgers is staying. He's not going to Denver. He's staying. I went to the Super Bowl. Everyone's asking me, what's Aaron Rodgers going to do? I'm like, he's staying. On the show the whole time, he's staying. And he stayed. So I get this label as a Rodgers hater, but I said it was the smart thing to do to bring him back, to sign him. Because he's playing like an MVP. It makes sense to bet on the MVP. So I don't really have an issue with a lot of the way that this was handled. Now, I remember I didn't like the first round. I thought the trade up for Christian Watson when they could have had a different player. They could have just taken Watson at 22 for crying out loud and used 28 on anyone else and then had 2 second-round picks to get whoever and have multiple impact players. Maybe you get a tight end, a Jelani Woods, who can play or at least play this year. I had some problems with the process, and I think the skill positions was the biggest place I had those issues. But what they did was bet on Aaron Rodgers, and I am never going to fault an organization for betting on Aaron Rodgers off an MVP. But it just hasn't worked now. And so at a certain point, you have to say, okay, this formula, whatever it is not working. And I just don't know how you could watch what happened in like Buffalo, Cincy, or San Francisco, Dallas, and go, yeah, the Packers are equipped to hang with these teams. Now, I know they beat the Cowboys, but the Cowboys got beat by the 49ers. I don't think the Packers were going to beat the 49ers. Like in that 2-7, the Packers were going to lose by 2 scores. I think they could have given the Eagles a game, but the 49ers they were equipped to beat them. Sometimes you just kind of have to get lucky. You need your best players to play in the big moments, and you need your investments to pay off. Sometimes you just get unlucky. Your all-pro left tackle, for example, can't play in 2 straight playoff games in consecutive seasons, can't play in the most important games of your season. Some of that is just unlucky. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. All you're doing is deciding if a player, you have to pick a couple players, are going to produce more or less than the number set by PrizePicks. So Patrick Mahomes passing yards, Joe Burrow passing yards. Put them together, you've got a lineup. It's that easy. And you don't have to pick football. It could be basketball. It could be esports. It could be golf. Golf is starting again. The season's here. Let's do this. Baseball will be here before you know it. PrizePicks will let you make a lineup for any of that. Anything you can think of, really. And when you use the promo code LOCKEDON, you can get 100% match up to $100 on that first deposit when you use the promo code LOCKEDON. That's PrizePicks with the promo code LOCKEDON to get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Subscribe to Locked On Packers wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe to Locked On NFL and get daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories plus in-depth analysis on the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday. And Monday, local insiders cover the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. So I saved this for the second half of the show because I know people have a little Rodgers fatigue. And I get that. Adam Schefter. Your mileage may vary on Adam Schefter, although his reporting ended up being accurate given everything Aaron Rodgers told us, like all of the grievances, the situations. It was bad. So, like, I don't know why people still are weird about Adam Schefter, but he is also weird about stuff, and I don't know. But he reported that both sides are aware that a trade is a very real possibility. And that same day, on ESPN, Jeremy Fowler reported that Jordan Love believes he can play, wants to play, and could ask for a trade. Okay. Interesting. Interesting that these would happen on the same day, at the same network, from the same agency. Now, I'm not obviously 100% sure that that's where the information came from. I'm just saying we're talking about two players being reported on by the same network, but two different reporters represented by the same agency. Why do I think that? Why is that important? Okay. If the Packers want Aaron Rodgers back, they have absolutely no incentive to leak that trading is on the table. Because if you want Aaron Rodgers back, 100% sure, all in on Aaron Rodgers, you would not leak this. Because you would not want Aaron Rodgers to think that you leaked this. Because if Aaron Rodgers didn't leak it, you did. So this is the thing. When a story gets leaked like this, you always know, as the team or the player, maybe not always, most of the time you know who did it. We don't. But we can usually discern it because it's pretty easy to tell most times who benefits from the story being out there. In this case, it's Aaron Rodgers. And what I think is easy to conclude here is Rodgers has said there are certain things that he wants. He wants mutual interest, right? We talked about this last week, and that it is likely that what he wants is to be back under a certain set of circumstances. And I think the Packers want him to be back under a certain set of circumstances. And this, to me, is leverage. Float the trade. Trade is a very real possibility. This is Aaron Rodgers' way of negotiating through the media to say, look, if you don't want to bring back Allen Lazard and you want to bring back Big Bob Tunyon and Randall Cobb and these guys, that's fine. I'll walk. You can trade me. I'll tell you to trade me or I'll retire. And we know he's not going to retire, but he can make life difficult theoretically for the Packers. So that makes sense, right? Whether or not that means he's going to actually be traded is a very separate and very important distinction to make. Now, the Love part of this. It makes sense for Jordan Love to say, look, I want to play. Of course he does. And if I'm not going to play, if you're going to bring Aaron Rodgers back, if I think you want Aaron Rodgers back, then let's go. Send me somewhere I want to play, that I can play. Send me to Carolina. Send me to Indianapolis. Any of these teams that might be interested in trading for Rodgers that, let's say, Rodgers wouldn't want to play for. Give me a chance to do that. Give me a chance to go somewhere and actually do this. And I just want you to think back for a second. There was a story last spring from Tom Silverstein in the Milwaukee Journal about the Packers and their view on Jordan Love. And they believed that he had played really well. They were really into his growth and his ability to get better and handle the fundamentals and all the things that they were throwing at him, right? But there was a nugget in that article that one of the things the Packers wanted to see was a little bit more alpha from Jordan Love when Aaron Rodgers was around. Ironically, what they wanted was a little more Aaron Rodgers, because Rodgers, early in his career, acted like he was the guy, like his poop doesn't stink in Green Bay, messing around in practice on the scout team, doing, by the way, all the things that Brett Favre did too. And everyone that's where the belt was started, by the way, when he was the scout team quarterback. And that was when you started to get a glimpse of like, oh, this guy, he's kind of an MFer. And you get a sense of that swaggering persona, that charismatic figure. And you get it from the Packers' perspective going, hey, Jordan, if you want this job, go practice like it. Go play free and go lead these guys. And when Aaron is sitting, this is your team. When Aaron gets a day of rest, or when Aaron has cracked ribs and can't practice all week, or when Aaron has a broken thumb and can't practice all week, we want to see it. Why am I bringing that up? Well, here is a moment to show a little testicular fortitude. Here is a moment to say, okay, guys, you know I'm a guy. You said Brian Gutekunst can't stop saying we think Jordan Love is a starting quarterback. We think he could be a good starting quarterback. So if you think that's true, let's poop or get off the pot. That's the reality. And I think, not that it's going to be the deciding factor, but I think there is a fringe benefit there of showing the Packers like, hey, look, I'm going to put my foot down on this. It's like in all those movies where there's two people dating and I have one in my head and I can't think of the movie. And it's The Big Bang Theory, not a movie. And there's the pretty girl, the pretty neighbor, and the nerd who is in love with her. And he starts acting confident. And she goes, oh, I like this. And he goes, I can be whoever you want me to be. And she's like, come on now. Now, tropes aside, and whatever other issues that you might have with that show, there might be something there where the team is like, we want you to show a little something. And so maybe this moment of like, hey, you either want me or you don't. And maybe the better metaphor is like you're in a relationship with someone who is not convinced they want to be with you. And the best way to actually convince them is to say, like, you're either in or you're out. Is to bring it to them, put it on them to say, look, either I'm the guy or let's move on. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, no, it's you. It's always been you. Is that going to be the reason the Packers decide? No. But it's just an interesting aside in all this. It's something that I thought about in all of this. Now, does any of this drive outcomes? No. But I think it tells us that there's still a lot of things in play here. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that still needs to be determined. There's still ironing out of details that need to be done. And I think there is still an understanding that needs to be reached between the Packers and Rodgers at least. Let's start there because that is the domino. Because if Aaron Rodgers retires or gets traded, like there's nothing for Jordan Love to complain about. He's the quarterback. I don't think the Packers are going to be looking, if they do trade Aaron Rodgers, it's not going to be to the Raiders for Derek Carr. It's not going to be to the Jets for Zach Wilson. They're not getting a quarterback asset back in any of these deals. This is not going to be Stafford for Goff and picks. Like, it's not going to be that. Love is their guy. Tom Silverstein said recently on a podcast that he thinks the Packers still believe Jordan Love is the guy, but maybe just for one more season. Now, that doesn't make sense to me because of the contract and the way it's all working. Like, if you think Jordan Love is the guy in a year, then Jordan Love should be the guy now, and you have to rip the Band-Aid off. You have to be honest with yourself about where you are in your development. Can this team actually compete next year? I think the NFC still next year is pretty wide open. Because the Vikings, we know, are frauds. The 49ers have contract decisions to make, QB decisions to make. We'll see what the situation is there. Dallas botched it again. Who knows what decisions are coming there? LA does not look like the LA. The NFC South is a complete disaster. If Tom Brady goes to the AFC, he should stay in the NFC if he's going to keep playing. But I don't know, the Giants are just meh. You know, if the Commanders get Derek Carr, they get interesting, but they're not very good. Like, it's all there for the Packers if they can get a little bit better. So there's still, I think, an opportunity for this to get resolved, but I think it's clear to me through these reports that the Packers and Aaron Rodgers are not on the same page about what a return would look like. And until that changes, I'm going to continue to believe that Aaron Rodgers is not on this team next year. That is my belief right at this moment on, January 23rd. That Aaron Rodgers will not be a Green Bay Packer in 2023. When the information changes, I reserve the right to change my mind. But right now, I'm leaning that way. Is it a lock? No. It's like, I'm like 60-40, 65-35, something like that. But they're not in agreement on how to move forward here. And until they are, I'm going to continue to predict that Rodgers is no longer going to be a Green Bay Packer. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sports book in America. That's right. It's FanDuel. And you know that because I said that. And if you're new to FanDuel, even better. They've got so many great features that make sports betting fun and easy. I had a free bet last night and I used it. I did not hit it, but I was able, it was a free same game parlay. I was not a new user. I had already been using FanDuel and it was a promotion that I got to use. And I had, let's see, what did I have? I had CeeDee Lamb to be the first touchdown scorer, Brandon Ayuk to score a touchdown, and the 49ers to win. I got one of those three right, but I was getting 600 to 1. No, I was getting 60 to 1. And it was a free $10 bet. I got the $10 back in credit. It was great. And right now, new customers can get started with $150 in free bets when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up and use the promo code Locked On. Go to FanDuel.com/Locked On and do it. They have made it so easy and so fun. I am on that app every weekend. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet and get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. All right, we're back tomorrow. A lot more to get to this week as we approach the Super Bowl. I will be in Glendale for all of those shenanigans. So bringing you interviews and all kinds of fun stuff, just like we did last year. And more content, off-season content, as we try and work through what's going to happen with the Green Bay Packers. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, when we go live, we do it on YouTube. Our Locked On Packers YouTube page. Go subscribe so you can stay Locked On Packers.